Hey, what's going on, folks? This is Keith and you're watching Barber's Auto Help. Thank you so much for watching. Today's video is going to be a continuation of our series on the 2012 to 2018 Ford Focus Common Issues. Now, a bonus feature to this video is that the information shared is actually going to be applicable to the Ford Fiesta equipped with the DPS6 transmission as well. Now, the issue we're going to discuss today is inside the gearbox of the DPS6 transmission. And realistically, this is not a common issue per se. It's just the most common thing that fails inside the gearbox. So I thought it would be a good idea to add this information into this series. Now, the issue that I'm seeing with these is the locating tab for the upper shift drum tends to shear off. You can see right here inside the transmission case, it's sheared completely off. This is a good one. This is the one that sheared off. Now, some symptoms of this particular failure usually include a transmission fault message in your message center. Also, your check engine light will come on. Typically, codes P2837, shift fork B position circuit range, P287B, shift fork A calibration not learned, will be set in the TCM. And of course, the transmission will not shift correctly. So I wanted to discuss how I actually diagnosed this problem. And also I wanted to go into how the transmission actually works to give you a better understanding of how this fault happens and what causes this fault. And also I would like to give you some insight on how I personally repair this problem. Now, whenever I get one of these vehicles and it has these symptoms, I'm usually pretty confident as to what the problem is. So one of the very first things that I do is to start removing the TCM. There's only 2 electrical connectors that have to be disconnected as shown earlier, and there's only 4 bolts that hold the TCM to the transmission. And you'll notice once I take the TCM off that there are a couple of gears right behind where the TCM sits. And these are clock gears. One clock gear indirectly manipulates the upper shift drum and the other clock gear indirectly manipulates the lower shift drum. And you'll typically find a problem on the upper clock gear. Now, I go ahead and I paint both of the clock gears, and then one at a time I'll rotate each of the clock gears several turns in one direction or the other. If there's not a problem, typically you'll get 6.5 turns on the upper clock gear and 4.5 turns on the lower clock gear from stop to stop. So you should not be able to rotate that upper clock gear more than 6.5 turns in either direction. Same thing for the bottom clock gear. You should only be able to rotate that about 4.5 turns. And if you can turn it way more than that, like 10, 15 turns, you know you got a problem. And it's going to be the locating tab inside the transmission case that has sheared off that caused that. Now, if this helps, I've never seen a problem with the bottom clock gear. It's always been the top one, mainly because the locating tab for the shift drum on the bottom is much larger than the top one. You can see the side-by-side comparison right here. There's just a lot more meat on the bottom locating tab than the top one there. So they typically shear off on the top. And just to go in further and give you a better understanding of how this transmission actually works, this is a manual transmission that shifts automatically. So what's going on is the TCM is actually shifting this thing for you instead of having a gear shifter inside like you would on a traditional manual transmission. The way that it does that is the TCM actually controls the shift forks inside the transmission. And it does this via 2 shift motors inside of the TCM. So you see these little gears right here? Those gears are attached to motors inside that TCM, and those motors rotate, of course. And those gears go directly inside those 2 little holes that you saw earlier, and they drive the clock gears that we spoke of earlier. Those clock gears are indirectly linked to the shift drums, and they cause the shift drums to rotate in either a clockwise fashion or a counterclockwise fashion. Now, on the shift drums, there are these little grooves that have kind of like little ramps inside them. And those grooves receive paddles from the shift forks. Now, whenever the shift drum rotates, those paddles are either pushed up or down by those ramps inside of the shift drums, achieving different gears. On the bottom side of those shift drums, you'll see that you'll have locating tabs on the shift drums themselves. Now, those locating tabs are supposed to stop on the locating tabs inside the case. And whenever that tab is sheared off, it doesn't stop anymore. Now, the only way that the TCM is going to know what position that shift drum is in, thus knowing what gear the transmission is in, is if it has a reference point. And those stops provide that reference point for the TCM. If the TCM just spins that shift drum via the clock gears, and it just keeps spinning and spinning, it doesn't have a start-stop reference point, so it doesn't know where that shift drum is at in that rotation there. So obviously it's not going to shift the transmission correctly because it doesn't know what gear it's in. And that's what causes the transmission fault message to show up, and of course the check engine light to come on and the transmission to not shift correctly. Typically what I do to correct this is I replace the transmission case. You got two halves of the case, of course. You got the bell housing portion and then you got the gearbox portion. The gearbox portion is part of the case that you want to replace because it has the locating tab within it. Now, I don't typically replace anything else inside the transmission, barring the one-time use parts. And of course, you have to reshim the differential because you're replacing a case half. So the preload on the differential is going to be different with the new case half. So you have to measure that and of course choose the correct shim to set that preload on the differential. But other than that, I basically just replaced the case half. I also cleaned the gears up really well, and I cleaned the other case half really well, get all the metal and stuff off of it, clean the magnet up, and then I reassemble it, put the transmission back in the vehicle, fill it up with some dual clutch fluid, and send it on its way. And I usually have really good luck with that. I haven't had a comeback yet, knock on wood, doing it this way. Now that being said, you still want to check your clearances on your synchronizers. You also want to check the teeth on your gears and check for bearing damage and stuff like that while you're in there. Goodness gracious, it's kind of a big job, so take your time and look over it really well. If you see something that doesn't quite look right to you, now's the time to replace it if you're going to do this repair. Be careful, look it over really well. If you see something, replace it. Do this job once, for crying out loud. You don't want to take it back out and have to redo it. But realistically, these transmissions are really tough on the inside. There's a lot of hardened steel inside there that really is hard to damage. The material that shears off of the case is a soft aluminum, and the chances of it damaging a gear or a bearing, in my estimation, is quite slim. But you know, I'm not an engineer or a metallurgist. I just happen to know that these transmissions, other than that one point there, are very tough on the inside. So in my estimation, just replacing the case half and cleaning it up really well, of course doing your inspections and stuff while you're in there, should be sufficient for this repair. Well folks, that's pretty much it. I sincerely hope that this helped somebody. If it did, please give the video a like. Also, if you have any questions, just comment down below there. I'll be happy to get back to you. As always, read the entire description below this video before you apply any of this knowledge. I may need to clarify something, and that's where I do that. I highly advise that if you are to do a repair on the DPS6 transmission to fix this particular symptom or fault, get a repair manual. You have to have a repair manual, and you have to follow it to a T to do the job correctly. This video is in no way designed to take the place of a repair manual. You got to have that pretty big job. You don't want to be wrong on this, and you want to do the job correctly. And that being said, use any and all of this information at your own risk. I make no guarantees on the type of repair you're going to make, or if you're going to even address the issue at all. I just wanted to share my experience and perhaps point somebody in the right direction. So that's what this video is about. So thanks again, guys. Please like and subscribe. Have a good one.